Caution! You are about to enter the spin-free zone. Let's get started. Chapter 7 is all about the mass media. And what is the mass media? It covers a lot of different aspects. We've got television, radio, newspapers, magazines, the internet, and other means of popular communication. Today we live in a high-tech politic type of society. Why? Because pretty much when it comes to mass media, we're getting it through technology, whether it be the internet, TV, or even social networking. How do politicians use the media? Well, they throw media events, which are basically events purposefully staged for them to, they want it to look spontaneous, but it really isn't, because it makes them have a good image and connect to us, especially presidents are doing this. For instance, this picture over here that's about to pop up is an example of a media event. He knew it was happening, but it is staged, but they try to make it look like it was spontaneously. He's just at a fast food restaurant eating with his friends. The news media developed over time. It really hasn't been that important when it came to politics. They weren't really involved in much until the Antichrist came along in 1932. When he came along, he had what were known as press conferences, where it would be a meeting of public officials with reporters. He would meet with them. He had about 1,000 of them in his way too long tenure of office of 14 years. Just over 12 years. He was trying to go for his fourth term, as we know, breaking George Washington precedent of only running twice, because we don't want monarchs in the office, but apparently he just felt like he could do whatever he wanted. But back to the mass media. Another thing that we are starting to see, especially after what happened with Vietnam and especially what happened in Watergate, was investigative journalism, which is the use of in-depth reporting to unearth scandals, scams, and schemes, and that put reporters and politicians on opposite sides of each other. They used to work together, and now we're seeing investigative journalism like going against the politicians. Because of what happened with, as you can see up here, Nixon, and what happened with Deep Throat, that was a pseudonym used for Mark Felt, who helped Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein investigate the scandal of Watergate. We're seeing presidents not being in much favor anymore as they used to be. There are different types of media out there. The first one we're going to focus on that's not really as big of an influence on people like us today is the print media, and that's newspapers and magazines. Now, first of all, when it started, it was starting as yellow journalism, which was this sensationalized style of reporting that basically characterized our type of newspapers at the turn of the century. One of the most famous newspaper owners, William Randolph Hearst, he basically used yellow journalism to start the Spanish-American War. He basically got pictures of everything going on in Cuba, and he told his photographers, you furnish the pictures and I'll furnish the war, meaning with the sensationalized style of journalism. But we've gotten away from that. There's basically like a pecking order among newspapers, like who's the best, to like who's, down the list of like prominence and popularity. New York Times has the largest impact, but then after that, we see like the Washington Post, we see the Chicago Tribune, and other things like that. Newspaper and Newsweekly circulation has declined. We don't see newspapers as big of a deal anymore. Why? Because of the internet and because of television. Now we're going to focus on broadcast media, which is televisions and radios. We had radios for a while from the 1920s. That's where, on until about 1960 is when it really became involved in politics with the Kennedy-Nixon debate. And that really showed politicians' appearances and mannerisms. The whole consensus is that if you listen to it on the radio, the debate, the people who listened to it said Nixon won, but if you watched it on TV, the people who watched it said that Kennedy won, all to do with politicians' mannerism and appearance. because Nixon looked sick. He had just got over the flu, while Kennedy was on some type of special medicine that made him look orange, but on black and white TV, he just looked tan, and he looked healthy and young and good looking. But what it did was it brought politics into our homes, into it, especially with the Vietnam War, that was known as the living room war, because everybody could see the images of the actual war at home, and that's what made us start not really trusting our government too much. The government tries to regulate the broadcast media, and they've done so by creating the bureaucratic agency called the FCC, the Federal Communication Commission, and they basically regulate the airways in one of three ways. They either prevent the near monopoly control of the market to make sure that there's not one dominant company controlling everything, like for instance how GE owns NBC and MSNBC and all those. They don't want one company controlling all of it. They review performances of stations. They see to make sure that they're not being inappropriate in any way and that they have the rating system, and they issue fair treatment rules for politicians. They basically say, listen, it doesn't matter what news channel you are on or what station you're showing it on, all politicians have the equal right to air their commercials and have time on those channels like that. From broadcasting, we're seeing the rise of narrowcasting. Narrowcasting is the idea of media programming that is targeted towards one specific audience with one certain topic, like we see with C-SPAN, we see with Fox News, we see with MSNBC, and we always see this on cable news. Broadcast news is the network news, the kind that you can get basically with an antenna. The potential of cable to report on the news as it happens is going to happen here, and it offers a myriad of choices. We don't see the short sound bites like we do on the network news. We actually see a lot of attention focused on everything. Sometimes, especially with C-SPAN, they don't have sound bites. They just show you everything that's going on. But the resources are limited, and stories aren't always substantive because of the fact that there's so much out there. They still have to cut down on what's being shown. The internet has also had a major impact on politics and government in general when it comes to the internet and media. It is a potential for Americans to learn about politics, but we have to remember this. Americans don't care about politics. They don't care about the government. They just would rather watch something else or do something else, look on Twitter, look on Facebook, than actually have to learn about what the country's doing and going through. So they're not going to go on the internet for political information. They're going to go on the internet to shop and to watch YouTube videos of people screaming and crying over double rainbows and things like that instead of learning about politics. Some ways that they will get information are through blogs, but that's pretty much it. Most of the media are owned by private businesses. Only a small number of TV stations or news stations on the radio are publicly owned, like NPR, National Public Radio, or PBS, Public Broadcasting Station. Those are publicly owned. The rest of them are owned privately. So they are independent on whatever they want to report. They don't have to follow government regulations like that. But they're also completely dependent on advertising revenue. So they have to make sure they're doing things. For instance, a few years back, a reporter, a guy who had his show on Fox News by the name of Glenn Beck, he was very extremely right. He got fired because so many people were so offended by him, the advertisers dropped their commercials, so they couldn't afford to keep them on. So there's an example of how they're completely dependent on advertising revenue. Some of the groups that own these are usually chains, massive media conglomerates that account for over 4/5 of the nation's daily newspaper circulation. So if you ever listen to the radio, like for instance, if you listen to a channel like WLS, which is channel 890, they always say, we're a cumulus station, meaning that they're owned by another company. Or if you listen to most radio channels anymore, they're owned by iHeartRadio. There's another example of a chain. And they mostly control broadcast media as well. How do we find the news? Well, first of all, the reporters have to go get it for us. And how did they do that? Number one, through beats, where they go to specific locations where news happens all the time, like Congress and the White House. White House is the only residency in the world that actually has its own news corps. Trial balloons, those are those things where, someone from the White House will call up, John Smith over at ABC News and be like, hey, guess what I know? Leak it to everybody, but I didn't tell you this. They'll intentionally leak something to kind of gauge what the public's feeling about it. If the public likes it, great. They'll be like, yep, we did that. But if the public doesn't like it, we'll be like, oh, that was just a rumor. That's not true. So reporters and politicians depend on each other because One, the reporters rely on them for the stories, but the politicians rely on them to get the stories out to the public so that they can have their face in the limelight. I thought you guys might find this interesting. When people are searching on the internet, these are the top 25 searches on Lycos, which is a search engine like Google, that in 2008, that was during the presidential election. If you see, there is basically one thing on here that has to do with the presidential election, maybe one and a half, all the way down to number 12, Sarah Palin. But if you look a little bit further down, Bristol Palin, her daughter is on there too. But pretty much everything else is what? Entertainment, gossip, that kind of stuff. Clay Aiken, YouTube, Paris Hilton, okay? Those are the type of things that you're seeing. When the news reporters present the news, it's very superficial. They don't really cover a lot because they want to entertain. They don't want people to lose their mind. And all of a sudden, you know, you're talking about the news, and then all of a sudden you see this. Because people aren't paying attention. They just glaze over. They don't want to hear it. So they have what are known as sound bites, which are just short video clips, usually ranging from like 10 to 15 seconds, that they show someone talking. Now, when it comes to actual political elections, they cover even a shorter period of time because people really don't care. They want the stories that bleed, like gang violence or a murder or something like that. They'll listen to a longer sound clip for that. But if it comes to politics, especially presidential elections, people really glaze over. So that's why they get about 10 seconds a time. When it comes to bias in the news, majority of people feel that news is biased. And, you know, depending on what side you're on, if you're on the left, you think the right's biased. If you're on the right, you think the left is biased. But generally, it's not biased. The news reporters aren't biased on the TV. They give the facts. But what is the actual news bias towards? They want to get the largest audience, so they're going to show the stuff with good pictures, high drama. If it bleeds, it leads. And sometimes a lot of those stories tend to favor the left, but not necessarily someone going on TV and saying, oh, Obama's terrible, or oh, he's the best thing ever, follow him. That's not what's happening. They're just showing the shows that tend to make them look better. Going along with what I was just saying about how the media wants to show a lot of coverage on pretty pictures and stuff with high drama, just looking at the stories that most people tune in over, you know, the past several decades, some of the top ones are some of the biggest, highest drama. And I don't mean to make light of these situations. They were terrible, horrific situations, but it's something it's like a train wreck. You just can't look away. The top one being the shuttle, the Challenger, that exploded in 1986, and then after that, 9/11. But if you kind of look down the list, you can see that it's a lot of things that have to do with high drama. The media gets involved a lot in agenda setting, where they basically choose what they feel is the most important thing to put on TV. So they'll take the top, there's thousands of stories they could pick from. They take the top ones, and when they take those top ones, we see that and realize, oh my gosh, those are the most important things that we need to worry about in this country. And what happens from there? Step 3, the government says, oh my gosh, this is what people care about. That means that we need to do something about it. And that's what they put at the top of their policy agenda. So with the media's agenda setting function, we're looking at the policy agenda. Again, that is the issues that attract serious attention by public officials because we, the public, are worried about them the most, and the media is the one that influences us. So when politicians look at this, a lot of times we will see politicians become policy entrepreneurs, where they will use their political capital in an issue, a particular issue, to try to get things done at higher government levels. If you get the chance to see the movie Lincoln, about the greatest president in the history of the world, one of the greatest people in the history of all time, because he's just the most amazing thing on earth ever in the United States. What you need to know is that he used his political capital of pretty much winning the Civil War to help get the 13th Amendment passed, which abolished slavery. That is an example of a policy entrepreneur. And sometimes he didn't necessarily use media awareness of the issue like we're seeing more so today. Why? Because media has exploded in the 20th century, and it wasn't around as much in the 19th century. When it comes to the media and fixing or adjusting or even molding the scope of government, media restricts politicians, actually, in some ways. They're a watchdog. They're always watching out for what they're going to do right and wrong and making sure that they're on their toes, so that stops politicians from doing certain things they might want to do. Anytime there's a new proposal out, there's always skepticism. So with that, that restricts the scope of government because there's always someone out there who's got an opinion on it and they're going to blast it out to the media and saying how bad it is. However, they can help the government grow because of the fact that when the media identify a problem, it forces the government to address it, and then that can in time make the government bigger and bigger. When it comes to individualism in the media, candidates run on their own appeal by being, one of the people on television. It's very Jacksonian of them to do that by trying to appeal to the people and to the individual. And when it comes to the media, they really don't focus on Congress that much. It's a lot easier to focus on one person than it is to focus on 535 people. So guess who they focus on? That's right, the president. When it comes to democracy and how the media fits into the idea of democracy, well, information is the fuel of democracy. The more we know, the more we can efficiently run this country and make it a democracy by we, the people, ruling it. But guess what? The news doesn't give us that much information. All they do is give us the big sensationalized stories, and it's the entertainment more than the information. And so it's very on the surface. It's very superficial. It's the top of the iceberg that killed the Titanic. Now, news is also a business, so it gives people what they want. It's not a matter of it's just the government informing us on things. What is the number one job of any business? Good, you said it, to make profit. And that's what is happening in the news business as well. So they're trying to give what the people want to make sure they're making lots of money. All right, so what's the moral of the story with Chapter 7? We are seeing that the media shape public opinion on political issues and influence the policy agenda, that the list of things that the government looks at that concern us, the people. Broadcast media has definitely replaced print media over time because it's just easier and more entertaining, pictures and movement and all that kind of stuff. Narrowcasting and the internet are further shifting the media to a different way of entertainment. And because media is mostly controlled by private companies that are seeking profit, the way that media is biased is to make sure that the stories are entertaining and have lots of drama. So, I'm Mrs. Thorson. You stay classy, Sandwich High School.